Crypto is fascinating. It's a market where $5 billion can just poof, disappear on a random Monday within minutes. That's what we saw with Mantra Finance. And we still don't know who made bank here. But under this context, when we talk about $5 billion here, then the market cap of Cardano, 21 billion, doesn't appear that large anymore after all. Cardano is at place number 10. So there's only 9 cryptocurrencies that are larger. And within the layer 1 eco space, so within the cryptocurrencies that also provide their own transaction settlement, Cardano is at place number 6. However, interestingly enough, the value that's transacted on Cardano is not that large. There's only 300 million of total value locked. 300 million relative to 21 billion, that's less than 2%. Or in other words, Cardano might also be 98% hot air. Here's the total value locked over time. To be fair, it used to be larger in the past. We were at 700 million and it seems to go in quite volatile waves. Now, parts of that volatility is the ADA token itself moving up and down. Here's the total value locked measured in Cardano. And unfortunately, since October of 2023, we don't really see any growth of the decentralized finance ecosystem on Cardano anymore. Now, there are 2 ways to interpret the situation. The first one is, again, that Cardano is overvalued. It's a lot of hot air and at some point it might implode, similar to Terra Luna, similar to Mantra. The second interpretation is that maybe Cardano has a lot of potential future growth ahead of it. Let's have a look at the relative valuations. Now, here's a chart that most people look at. This is Cardano in US dollars, and sometimes we've got hype, sometimes the bubble busts. Then we had our second bubble, then a second bust, and maybe we can go back again to $3 and beyond. But I don't like charts like this because this is a linear scale. I think the logarithmic scale is better because instead of looking at dollar differences here that are constant, we look at percentage differences that are constant. In other words, this rally over here is slightly less than this rally over here. So we can compare how much percentage gains or how much percentage losses are we going to make at different phases in the market. And in the end, it's all about percentages, right? That's why we buy or sell a cryptocurrency. We are not really interested in the price. A 200% gain from 3 cents to 9 cents is the same for us like a 200% gain when we go from 25 cents to 75 cents. But in the end, it's all about relative performance. The reason why we buy an altcoin is in order to outperform, right? We buy an altcoin to do better than Bitcoin, to do better than Ethereum, to do better than the general market. And the interesting thing about crypto is that attention tends to move from token to token. So at one point, it might be Cardano that's hyped. At another point, it might be Dogecoin that's hyped. And so capital just flows from one asset to the next. And we tend to be within a trading range long term. And so here is that trading range. This is Cardano dominance. How much of all of cryptocurrency's market cap is in Cardano? And this tended to peak at 4.5% and this tended to bottom at roughly 0.4, 0.5%. Now this tells us 2 stories. First of all, the rallies tend to be very, very quick. Just within a few days, Cardano can outperform the rest of crypto by several 100%. But most of the time, we tend to see underperformance. So the down moves take much longer than the rallies. It is normal that when we hold a cryptocurrency, that if attention doesn't move towards that asset, maybe because of news, that then capital goes to other places. Here is Cardano relative to Ethereum. Again, we tend to see tops at similar levels. Yes, the latest tops haven't been as high as the very first one, and we might see long-term underperformance. But it's still noteworthy to see this kind of a trading range, right? It's relatively tight. This gives us an idea. A chart like this gives us a way better idea if Cardano is worth buying or if it's better to go into other assets. Or in other words, this is much more useful than this chart over here, right? We have no idea at what point we might top. But with the Cardano dominance or with the relative valuation to Ethereum, we do see how times might get heated. Now there's also Cardano relative to Bitcoin, and again a somewhat constant range. And if Cardano was to fall again versus Bitcoin by another 30, maybe 40%, at that point it could make sense to dollar cost average into the asset. We just buy several times and then we are selling when the very short-term pump happens again. There are many reasons why Cardano could go up, right? It could be news, but it can also be plain market manipulation, because a lot of market makers and a lot of centralized exchanges still hold Cardano tokens and they want to sell off their bags at some point. And when there is some volatility, if there is a price spike, that generates a lot of retail interest. And then of course with that retail interest comes liquidity and the market makers can dump on the people. And the cheaper Cardano becomes within crypto, so relative to Bitcoin or just relative to everything else, right, as in the dominance, the more likely manipulation becomes. And then again, there's not that much risk in buying at those depressed levels. It appears as if the worst that can happen is that the price just goes in sync with the market as a whole. Now, looking at all of those charts and looking at the still comparatively high market cap, at least to its usage, I'm not a fan of getting into Solana right now, especially since the market as a whole tends to still decline. But there will be a time when something becomes cheap enough to buy it again. Right now, I'm betting on falling prices, as you probably know. I have shared this several times on this channel. Here are trades by the premium members of this community. We are shorting various altcoins on different platforms. And again, most altcoins tend to underperform Bitcoin most of the time. So this is the way to make money in this market. Once we are depressed enough, we go of course contrarian again, but this will likely take a few more months. Until then, feel free to join us in premium. The link is down below. It's thebitcoinstrade.com. It's currently $125 per month. There's also a 1-week money back guarantee. And in case you want to have a one-on-one call with me, you can also sign up for the yearly subscription. You also save $250 in the process. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish this regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. Helps the channel grow. See you next time on YouTube or see you in premium. Cheers.